transferred into the care of the Red Cross for transportation out of the Gaza Strip and to the safety of the Israeli authorities after 738 days in captivity. You can't even begin to imagine what must be going through the minds of those hostages. Interestingly, some of the hostages and their families were able to talk to each other in the last couple of hours via video telephone calls that were made by Hamas to their loved ones. So at least their loved ones, even though the first 7 hostages had been released, were able to know that their loved ones were also in the process of being released. But of course, if you are the families of those who have been held for so long, you are not going to be finally relieved until you know and you have confirmation from your own government that these people have actually crossed the border into Israel and into the safety of the Israeli authorities. And what will be happening next, understandably, given the conditions that these people have been held in for more than 2 years now, is that they will be undergoing medical checks. There is no doubt that there could be some complex medical needs, let alone the psychological needs for these hostages, former hostages, that will need to be addressed in the hours and the days ahead. But of course, as soon as it's possible, which will be soon, they'll be able to meet up with some of their loved ones again, as they've been desperately waiting to do that for the last 2 years. And we should just say, for those looking at the images on GBNews television, you can see on the left of the screen the main chamber in the Knesset there as they await Donald Trump, the US President, and his remarks to the Israeli Parliament. This is a man absolutely very widely seen throughout Israel as being pivotal to the process that is now underway today, the release of these remaining hostages, and the hope, of course, that the 20-point peace plan that his administration has put in place will be adhered to, that the parties on both sides, in conjunction with, of course, a lot of other interested parties in that region, particularly some of the Gulf Arab states, they'll be able to continue down that path to peace, and we could have something that is just a bit more sustainable and longer lasting than what we've seen of late. You're looking now at helicopters that are waiting to pick up those hostages, former hostages, to transport them to the medical facilities in Israel, as we saw with the first 7 hostages who were released just over 2 or so hours ago. You know, we've seen this over the last 2 years, this kind of process of releasing a certain number of hostages, but no more than a dozen or 2 at a time, and then the remainder of the hostages remaining in captivity for this period of time. Well, now finally all of those hostages, alive and dead sadly, will be released from the Gaza Strip and returned back to Israel. And it is incredible to look at the images on the right of the screen that are coming from Hostage Square in central Tel Aviv. I've been in there and you cannot help but be moved by what you're greeted with in there, because it's not just well-wishers who are turning up. You see in there hostage family members who, you know, have taken turns to mount a vigil there within Hostage Square, keeping up the pressure on the Israeli government to ensure that the plight of their loved ones are front and centre of everything that Israel has been doing over the last 2 years. And now, finally, even though, of course, it's tinged with the sadness of realising that 28 or so of those hostages didn't make it back alive, it is their remains that are being returned. But even that is very, very important for those loved ones finally to be able to get their loved ones' remains back, to give them a decent and proper burial and to begin the grieving process proper, because of course it's been suspended for such a long period of time. These are historic scenes that we are witnessing, and it has, as I say, to be hoped that we can continue on the path that President Donald Trump and his administration have managed to get all sides to agree to at the moment. There will be bumps along the road, there always is, in these peace processes. But if it's robust enough, if all of the sides, particularly the likes of the Gulf Arab states who now seem invested in this, can stay the course as well, then the hope is that there can be a peaceful and, a just and a longer-lasting peace process.
It's very moving to see the images of the twins reunited. Ziv and Gali Berman, young men, who've aged so much in those 2 years. Very moving.
Well, hopefully, if we've got those still images, we can try and bring those to you again. But yes, Ziv and Gali Berman, who were taken hostage by Hamas on October the 7th, have been held for 738 days in captivity and separated from each other. I mean, twins are obviously, just by the very nature of what they are, they are very close. To be separated, not really to know how the other one is faring, and then today, finally, to be reunited. And as I say, those still images showing them emotionally hugging each other.
Mark White, if you stay with us, we're going to be joined now by spokesman at the Embassy of Israel, Alex Gandler. Alex, good morning to you.
Hello, good morning.
I don't know what is the right word, whether to say congratulations seems the wrong word, but it's just a great relief, isn't it, that the hostages have been handed over?
It's a morning of a huge breath for all Israelis. We are all breathing again. Many Israelis stayed throughout the night watching TV, waiting for any news to come out of Gaza, waiting for this 8 a.m. marker, Israel time, for the first hostages to be released. And I've heard your report. Your reporter was saying previous hostages, former hostages, and it's something that is a bit hard for us to accept and understand. We've been waiting for this moment for 2 long years, not to talk about the hostages themselves and their families. So it is a congratulations, but we cannot forget that we still have 28 hostages left. Yes, they are deceased, but these 28 hostages, especially for Israelis, are still hostages, and we want to have them back.
And Alex, is there an indication of how that is progressing? Is the Israeli government expecting to receive those bodies back within the time limit? Or I know there's been some discussion about perhaps it being difficult for Hamas to locate them, perhaps rival groups may have possession of some.
Yes, Hamas and other groups, and also Gazan civilians who came into Israel on October 7th, 2023, took hostages. Some of them were alive when they were taken and killed while they're in Gaza. Some were killed and abducted from Israel. We want to have them all within the framework of this agreement. This agreement says everyone in the first 72 hours. The 72 hours ends today at 6 p.m. Israel time, 4 p.m. UK time. We obviously understand that there are some problems with retrieving all of them because they're held by different groups and civilians in Gaza. But we expect to receive all of them, and if not, then we will calculate our further measures.
And Alex, the President of the United States is going to, I imagine, get quite a reaction and quite a reception when he arrives, when he speaks, rather. How critical to this release of the hostages is Donald Trump?
Extremely critical, and you can see it by the welcome he's getting both in the Israeli parliament, but also you're showing Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, and you see the American flags everywhere. And thank you, Donald Trump signs. I think everyone in Israel understands the importance that President Trump played in this deal and the release of the hostages. He was a vital element in it, actually the linchpin to all of it. So yes, absolutely, we have great gratitude to President Trump.
I'm just curious, Alex, because the unbridled scenes of joy on Hostage Square, is anyone going to work today in Israel, or are they all out in the streets celebrating the return of these hostages?
I think there isn't a dry eye in Israel. I think all Israelis are completely glued to either their TV screens or on their way to Hostage Square. I woke up this morning, 8 o'clock was 8 o'clock Israel time, 6 a.m. Was the moment the hostages were supposed to be released. I woke up just before that, opened my phone, and I forgot to get dressed to go to work. Israel completely, every Israeli, not only in Israel, but across the world, is completely glued to the screens at the moment, looking at every picture that comes out of Camp Re'im, where the former hostages are now with the IDF, looking at every van of the Red Cross that is crossing the border to look for a sign of life, to look at how they look now, because these faces, these names, they've been etched into our souls for the last 2 years. We know them so well. They don't know how well we know them, how we know their families, their parents. So yes, every Israeli is extremely excited today. We are extremely emotional. It is a very important and great day, and you can see this joy, unabrupted joy that we haven't seen for the past 2 years. This is real joy.
The hostages, obviously, we're thrilled that they're free, but Alex, they're going to need a lot of tender love and care, because God only knows what nightmares they've experienced and endured in those darkened tunnels for 2 years.
Yes, I've heard a psychiatrist talk today, the psychiatrist that is in charge of their care when they come back to Israel. And he said that this is going to be a lifelong event. This is not something, maybe physically they'll be better with time, but emotionally and mentally, this is something that they'll probably won't forget for the rest of their lives. Everyone in Israel is trying to hug them as much as possible. The hostages that have returned in previous hostage deals, they are guarded very well in Israel by all sides of society. Everyone is trying to be very careful with them to understand what they went through, the horrors they went through in Hamas tunnels, the deprivation, the hunger in Hamas tunnel, the beatings, the moment itself of being abducted. Only a couple of days ago, when this deal was signed and announced, a young man committed suicide. He survived the Nova Festival massacre. He hid under a car with his girlfriend. He tried to shield her and was shot twice. She was shot as well and died there. He was saved and lived for these 2 years with tremendous psychological pressure. And when he heard that everyone is coming out, the presumption is that he felt that this was his time to go. And it is something that both the hostages, but also others that have survived this horrible massacre that went out throughout the entirety of the south of Israel are experiencing and living with. So the psychological pressure and damage that have been caused by that day specifically, but also by the last 2 years, has been tremendous, and people are coping with it. All of Israeli society is coping with it.
And what next? We don't want to. Obviously, this is an important day, and everybody's celebrating. But Alex, the next stage, it's not in the 20-point peace plan because Hamas won't accept it. But Trump's plan says they have to de-arm.
They have to de-arm. It isn't the 20-point plan. It is point number 13. Point 13 calls on Hamas and all other Palestinian factions to de-arm and some of them to leave the Gaza Strip. It is something that we're going to be very serious about. We're going to see that it happens because we cannot continue to live next to a terrorist organization. We will not continue to live next to a terrorist organization. And if need be, we will de-arm them ourselves, as we have been doing until now. If they want to do it in a peaceful way, we're willing to do it. This is the framework. This is the agreement. It's the diplomatic way to achieve it, and we want to go through that diplomatic way. But if not, as Clausewitz said, war is the end of diplomacy, and to war we will go again in order to de-arm them. Hamas will not remain a part of the Gaza Strip. We do want to see a reconstruction of it. We do want to see Palestinians have a good life, but we're not willing to see Hamas part of it.
And Alex, just one final question. You've lived in the UK through these last 2 years, and Israel, the Israeli government, has come under excoriating criticism from some aspects of our media and many thousands who've marched the streets. What's your message to them as this peace deal is signed today?
They've been marching through the streets for the past 2 years, asking for a ceasefire. A ceasefire is in place. The war is over. If they truly wanted a ceasefire, it is here. So I ask them, what do they want now? Why are they demonstrating now? Why did they demonstrate yesterday? Why did they demonstrate after the Manchester synagogue stabbing and murdering of Jews? It seems like it's not that. It seems like, as Suella Braverman once said, it's marches of hate. And if they want to prove me otherwise, they can stop marching.
All right, Alex, that's Alex Gand, who's spokesman at the Embassy of Israel. Mark White is still with us. Mark White.
Well, we can see on the right-hand side of the screen there the cheers coming up from Hostage Square in central Tel Aviv, perhaps absorbing the news that's just been confirmed that those remaining 13 hostages have now been handed over to the care of the Israel Defense Forces as they make their way out of the Gaza Strip to the safety of Israel. So for those 7 already, but the remaining 13, their ordeal almost at an end. They've got a long road ahead of them, of course, still, in terms of the medical assistance that they will undoubtedly need, the psychological assistance they will undoubtedly need, but of course, I'm sure first and foremost in the minds of those who've been released is the desire just to meet up with their loved ones again after so long, 738 days in the captivity and as a hostage of the Hamas terror group. So now at least in the safekeeping of the IDF and making their way, as we speak, out of the Gaza Strip. And on the left-hand side of the screen, again, we await President Donald Trump, the man who's widely regarded across Israel as being pivotal in what we're witnessing today, preparing to speak to the Knesset. He already signed a book just as he entered Parliament to say that this is a great and a beautiful day. You can almost hear him speak those words, but Donald Trump, I'm sure, will have a rapturous reception from the Israeli Parliament.
And Mark, interestingly, it was reported a few days ago that a deal of this sort had been on the table a year ago, but the Israeli government wanted to wait until Trump was inaugurated. They didn't think they could deal with Biden. They didn't think he would have the necessary security guarantees. It does seem to be that it's Trump and Trump's team that have enabled the trust on both sides to bring this apart.
Well, listen, there are, as we know, many out there who would probably be classified as Trump haters, but this is an individual who has, you know, a very forceful personality. If anybody can bring the sides together and push forward this process, I think it's Donald Trump. And I think undoubtedly that's what we're seeing. I'll be really interested to know exactly what the role was, this key role apparently that the UK played in this behind the scenes, because it was very interesting when we had Bridget Phillipson doing the rounds yesterday, doing the political interviews and echoing what Sir Keir Starmer has said about Britain's pivotal role, key role behind the scenes. You then had the US ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, calling Bridget Phillipson delusional and saying that she has Trump
and Mark,
to thank for what's going on here.
Even in the Trump way of doing things, for a diplomat to say that of a very senior cabinet minister, for the diplomat who's based here, quite unusual.
Which I think gives you an indication of just what the Trump administration actually really feels about Britain's role here. Interestingly, though, this morning we got a post out on social media from Steve Witkoff, President Trump's man, his envoy in the Middle East, thanking Jonathan Powell for his role. Jonathan Powell, the national security...
The friend of China.
Spokesman for, of course, Sir Keir Starmer, and a man under a great deal of pressure because of the fallout from the collapse of that Chinese spy case. So, you know, you can accuse me of being cynical, but I have my suspicions about the timing of that particular social media post.
Or perhaps they're just not speaking to each other while they're tweeting and coming at it from different angles. Can I just ask you a very quick security question? Because clearly this is a day of great celebrations for the Israelis, huge relief for those hostages and their families. But it's come at a price, the release of hundreds of convicted murderers, convicted terrorists, some of whom architected some fairly serious suicide bombings and others in Israel over the last 20, 25 years. Do you think there'll be elements of Israeli society, the Israeli government, that are very nervous about the implications of that?
I think every element of the Israeli population will be very nervous at the fact that so many people who have been, in some cases, convicted of very violent offences, including murder, are being released. Some are going to be deported from the region, or certainly from Israel and Gaza, won't be allowed to return there. But clearly there's concern. 1,700 odd of those that are being released are those that were detained, Gazans that were detained after the 7th of October terrorist attacks. But yes, at least 250 of those are people who have been convicted of some very serious terrorist offences.
They're radicalised.
Well, there's no doubt they were radicalised before they were even convicted. But I think for Israel, it's, they're holding their noses. They realise that part and parcel of the deal to get those hostages released and to get a peace process underway requires the release of a certain number of Palestinian prisoners, both convicted and those who have been detained. It's not something that people in Israel welcome, but they realise, as I say, it's part and parcel of that process that has to be underway to ensure that this actually may stand a chance of being a sort of longer lasting and more sustainable process.
Mark White, thank you. And let's stay on the security theme and bring in the National Security Analyst and Intelligence Officer and Editor of Middle East 24, Dan Pfefferman. Dan, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Huge celebrations to be seen in Israel today. Do you have concerns about how long this truce will last? Do you think there's a realistic possibility of Hamas laying down their arms?
Unfortunately, I don't. I mean, this truce will last so long as it serves Hamas's interest. I found myself for the last 2 years ad nauseum reminding viewers across international television that there was a truce and a ceasefire and 0 Israeli military or civilian presence in Gaza on October 6, 2023. Hamas is completely and totally ideologically committed to fighting Israel's destruction. It does not seek Palestinian independence. It does not seek any kind of reasonable achievement. It wants to continue to wage its holy war against Israel, to conquer what it views as historic Palestine, and then eventually link up with all Muslim Brotherhood entities, take over the region, the world. And so this is, from its point of view, this is a ceasefire to allow it to regain strength, to rearm, and to launch other attacks when it deems fit. Hamas is radical, but it's not stupid in that sense. And so the only way that this works and actually leads to something is if Hamas is forced under extreme amounts of pressure, military, which we saw from Israel, diplomatic, economic especially, in order to functionally disarm and force it to relinquish control on Gaza.
Dan, can I interrupt you? How do you force it to relinquish every arm? How do you know they've done it? Can you? Because you can't believe a word they say. They're terrorists. They are wedded to killing every Israeli that sets foot on this soil. How can you believe a word they say?
You can't believe a word they say. And so what you have to do is you have to move piece by piece and verify as you go. Arms have to be collected. Terrorist infrastructure has to be dismantled. Those terrorists who are not willing to undergo deep reform, and I'm not even sure that's possible, need to be exiled or jailed. And you need a capable, committed security force comprised of, let's say, non-Hamas Palestinians, of Arab forces, of U.S. observers or European observers, to ensure that Hamas cannot disarm. As we speak, Hamas has rounded up dozens of Gazans that it suspected either collaborated with Israel or just simply opposed Hamas's rule, and is set to execute them in the Gaza Strip. This is not any kind of force that seeks peace or the betterment of its people. And so this pressure has to be kept up, and Western pressure, and this was key to this deal, Western pressure, especially Americans, but this is really where the Europeans failed, this is where your prime minister failed, has to ensure that the Turks and the Qataris pressure Hamas and constantly give them a choice between positive cooperation with the West, economic cooperation, diplomatic cooperation, or supporting these jihadist terrorist organizations who seek only destruction in the region. Until now, they've had it both ways. They're either adjacent to NATO or part of NATO and have access to Western arms and infrastructure and protection, and continue to support jihadist Islamist causes, especially Hamas. And they have to be forced to continue to make this choice, choke off Hamas from financial means, constantly ramp up the pressure against it, forcibly collect the arms, clash with Hamas where is necessary, and keep the pressure on them completely and entirely, not trusting anything they say, because anything they say is just an excuse to buy time and to rearm and to regroup.
Well, Dan Pfefferman, thank you so much for your time this morning. That was Dan Pfefferman, who is a national security analyst and intelligence officer and editor of the Middle East 24. Well,
time is now 10:02. You're watching Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Miriam Cates. It is a massive, massive day. Those 20 hostages have been freed, reunited, we trust now, with their families. The former Attorney General, Michael Ellis, joins us.
Hello, good morning, Andrew and Miriam.
Could we just say you were born into a Jewish family?
Yes, I was, and this is a very big day, in fact, for, as President Trump has acknowledged, it's a big day for the world. I think your previous guest there was right to exercise a little bit of caution about the coming years, because we have seen, Andrew, as you know, ceasefires before over the last sort of, decades, and things have broken down. I don't think that's likely to happen in the immediate future because of frankly, the muscular diplomacy, as I call it, of President Trump. He won't allow it, and he simply puts his foot down in a way that previous presidents of the United States haven't done. It's a force of personality, and as you were saying to Mark, it's not just the fact that he's President of the United States, because other presidents haven't been so successful in resolving crises like this. It's the way he exercises power, and it's that force of personality, and it's effectively knocking heads together.
He's the deal maker.
He is the deal maker, and it's almost, if you like, a command authority. I'm in charge around here, and the fact that he has got 20 leaders, heads of government from around the world, many of whom have had absolutely less than nothing to do with this. Well, I will name one name, Keir Starmer. But let's name another name. I mean, Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain.
Yeah.
Not only has he done nothing, in my view, to help this peace process, he's actually made it harder. They've been extremely hostile to Israel, the Spanish. They even blocked the Americans from using ports when the Americans wanted to fly equipment to Israel. They sent a gunboat to escort Greta Thunberg's flotilla.
Did they really?
They really have been hostile, and I think parties that take one side in a conflict, well, first of all, I think history is going to really judge those parties quite harshly. Yeah. I don't know about today's history or tomorrow's history, but I think in the long arc of history, I mean, I know what side I would have wanted to have been in, and that's not Hamas's.
No.
Well, doesn't it show just how powerful America still is? We have lots of discussion about this new multipolar world, and obviously people are very concerned about the rise of China, for example. But Israel has become increasingly isolated over the last 2 years from all other Western powers, including our own, perhaps with the exception of Germany. But all it's taken is for America to decide to use that muscle, to use its military might, and single-handedly Trump has brought this about.
Well, you're absolutely right, Miriam. He is the sun and the moon and the stars in this equation. He is the alpha and omega, as they might say. It wouldn't have happened without him. And the fact is, it's that type of muscular diplomacy. It's an imperial president.
Just stop you there, Michael, because if we watch you listening on the radio, we think these are the actual moments the hostages were handed over to the Israeli Defence Force. And these are actually live pictures. So this is what we're being told. They're actually being physically handed over.
And, of course, what's going to be fascinating, Andrew, and I think quite depressing, is the medical and psychological state of these hostages, because we know from other hostages that have been released earlier in the process that they have been badly mistreated. They have been deliberately starved. They've been physically and mentally abused. In some cases, kept out of daylight for many, many months. There may be some of these hostages that have never been in daylight in the last 2 years.
Could have been in that vast network of subterranean tunnels for 2 years.
So this will be with them if they live to, another 40 years. This will be with them their whole lives. This last 2 years, the most horrific experience, and they'll obviously undergo a battery of medical tests now, but. These are hostages who have been savagely mistreated. We know that from hostages that have been released earlier in the process.
Michael has said that it will be a lifetime for them.
Very much.
You never get over this.
You'll never. We're not psychiatrists, but I don't think one needs to be able to determine that you'll live with this forever after this has happened to you. But perhaps even worse are those, of course, who have lost their lives in this process. And I understand we're not going to get all of the bodies back, at least not immediately.
I think. Let's bring Mark White in.
So 2 pieces of significant breaking news. The IDF have now confirmed that is indeed the hostage transfer that we're seeing, that the Israeli hostages are now back safely in Israeli territory. They have crossed the border from Gaza into Israeli territory. They will now be taken by helicopter to a medical facility for proper checks before being reunited with their family. And another piece of important information, we're talking about Donald Trump's force of personality. Well, there was some uncertainty about whether Benjamin Netanyahu would actually be going to Sharm el-Sheikh to be part of this peace summit with 20 other leaders. That is now going to happen. A phone call took place with President el-Sisi of Egypt, with Donald Trump present, and
Netanyahu
Prime
got his
Minister
orders.
Netanyahu, and then basically
He was made an offer he couldn't refuse.
It's now been agreed
He
to
got his
that
orders.
Benjamin Netanyahu will go to Sharm el-Sheikh with Donald Trump for this peace summit.
And of course, there'll be
a
many
little later today.
leaders at that summit who Netanyahu would like to punch in the face, because, putting it bluntly,
Yeah.
because they have been. I'm right.
But I mean,
Look, part of this international arrest warrant. Of
Yes,
course.
exactly.
The truth,
the British government supports.
That's right. I mean, the truth is that that Keir Starmer and the British government have played an unhelpful role in this process, and the Israeli government have said that. The Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister yesterday gave an interview to that effect. Sharon Haskell, the Foreign Minister Gideon Saar has retweeted Ambassador Mike Huckabee's now famous tweet in which he said that British ministers were delusional about the role. Look, they've said, and they made it quite clear, and I don't think one needs to be an international diplomat to follow that, if you're going to recognise people, terrorists who are holding hostages, if you're going to recognise a country at that moment in time, then I think it's not going to play well. You can't say that you've been a positive arbiter of peace in this process.
Because if he meets Starmer, what's he going to say to Starmer? Because if Netanyahu set foot on British soil, he could have been arrested.
Yeah, well, presumably still could be. We'll have to see, but I suspect they're better diplomats than that, and I suspect they will shake hands.
Yeah.
I would imagine they would. Yeah.
Wasn't Netanyahu a hugely controversial figure, but given all that's happened in the last 2 years and indeed the last 30 years of his involvement, do you think perhaps he is now the most significant Israeli Prime Minister since David Ben-Gurion?
Oh, I think so, and I think, he has been an extraordinary force of nature. Whether one agrees with his politics or not, the strength that is required, the political courage as well as the physical courage to get through this process, is with the world effectively against you, is quite extraordinary. And if you look at the kinetic enemies of Israel, those that have actually tried to attack it, they come from 6 or 7 different quarters, around Israel, and they've all been dealt with. The Houthis in Yemen, there are factions in Iraq. Iran has been dealt a massive blow. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Assads in Syria. The whole landscape of the Middle East has changed because of what happened on the 7th of October and the way Netanyahu has dealt with it. And he hasn't dealt with it in an appeasing way, which I have to say Western leaders have, including, the Australian Prime Minister Albanese, in my view, and Mark Carney in Canada. This type of thing is where they have been recognising a Palestinian state, whilst Netanyahu has been fighting these enemies on all sides. So, whatever one's view of the internal Israeli politics, is incredibly complicated and incredibly vitriolic, is my understanding. They have a system, Miriam and Andrew, I think, which argues almost completely against proportional representation. They have an amazingly complicated system of PR, which allows tiny parties a lot of power, and it's a real complexity in the Israeli system.
You'll correct me if I'm wrong, but actually David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister, tried to argue in favour of replicating the British system.
Yes.
But obviously fails to make
some people may rue the day of that. When we see President Trump talking in the Knesset soon, that's an interesting... It's a unicameral legislature, the Knesset. It's 120 MPs, or MKs as they call them, and they're elected for 4-year terms. But the PR system that they've got is such that it really advantages tiny little parties. And of course, when you have these very small parties, they can be quite extreme to the left and right. and make things quite difficult. And then to try and be the Prime Minister of that type of coalition government when you're trying to please, you're really trying to square an impossible circle. And Netanyahu, he has been, whatever one thinks of his politics, you have to accept that he's been incredibly consequential. It's what we say, isn't it, about Nigel Farage? I mean, you know, but other types of leaders who make the weather.
And Mikey, to wrap up, I went on a tour of the Middle East as a young lobby correspondent of the Times in 1998. We saw Yasser Arafat in Gaza, and who did we see as Prime Minister in
Amazing.
Netanyahu.
Yeah, the longevity. And it's pretty tough to do that in
That's
modern...
nearly 30 years ago.
You talked about how the West always defaults to appeasement. Perhaps we've learned the wrong lessons from the last 100 years of history. But one of the criticisms that Netanyahu received on October the 7th was that his so-called appeasement of Hamas by withdrawing fully from Gaza and basically leaving them alone was one of the things that had led to the October 7th massacre. Do you think that was that kind of spurred him into the much more muscular response that we've seen since then?
That's very difficult to say, but certainly you make a very good point, Miriam, because people sometimes forget that Israel withdrew in 2005 from the whole Gaza Strip, or Gaza envelope as they call it, and they hadn't had a military presence there for many years, but Hamas took over and then started subjugating their own people. And one of the big problems, and this is in Trump's peace plan, but if they can get this right, it will be a game changer in the Middle East. It's the poisoning of minds. It's the way Hamas and other factions have with their young people, with children, even to kindergarten age, primary school age, where they give them these textbooks where it encourages, you know, anti-Semitism, blood libels, hatreds. If we can stop that, if we can stop that radicalisation, as it's called, then maybe the Middle East has a future in the decades to come, not just in the next few years. Because we've got to teach people to stop hating each other.
And they managed it in Northern Ireland.
They have largely managed it in Northern Ireland. There's a lot of work to do still in that region, but there are really good signs, as you know, both of you, with the Abraham Accords. And I think if the next step in this arrangement is to expand the Abraham Accords, now that is really going to be a game changer.
There's other Arab countries that have been hostile to Israel now on your terms.
So if you look at the United Arab Emirates, for example, relations between Israel and the UAE are excellent. You know, people go on holiday to each other's countries. They have a good working cultural and business relationships, and diplomatic relationships. The Kingdom of Bahrain and Israel as well, getting on very well. Relations are good with Morocco and other Arab countries. So it can be done. I think Saudi Arabia will be an important game changer here. And of course, one hears that things were moving very much in a favourable direction with Saudi Arabia and Israel before the October 7th attacks, which was said to be one of the motivations for the October 7th attack, to sort of stymie an improvement in relations. Whether that's true or not, one doesn't know. But I think that would really be a game changer, because what we want is not just short-term progress. We must all want long-term progress, and that's something I think that we need to hope for in the days to come.
OK, Michael, we're going to bring in our political editor, Chris Hope, who's joined us now. Chris, a hugely significant morning. The Prime Minister is in Egypt already, I gather, for this summit.
That's right. So this morning is about Knesset, as Michael's there saying eloquently about the Knesset, seeing what happens there. Donald Trump's there, of course, with the Israeli politicians. This afternoon it moves to Sharm el-Sheikh with this peace conference. Donald Trump is going to be chairing that. We expect Tony Blair to be there. Of course, he's itching for a role. Your old pal Tony Blair, Andrew Pearce. He's itching for a role, isn't he?
Will his wallet be open?
He wants to help. He was part of the quartet back in the day.
Yes, that went well.
After he quit government
Yes, that
in
went
2008.
well, didn't it?
Well,
That went well.
he did his best. It's
Having
hard.
caused half the trouble in the first place with the 2003 war in Iraq.
Well, he wants to get involved with the border peace. Donald Trump has said overnight he always liked Tony, but he needs to find out if he's popular.
Yeah.
Such a Trumpian answer.
Well, let's see how that one plays out. And then we've heard that the UK is hoping to play a leading role in the next phase of the peace plan. We're told by Number 10 overnight, but they must deliver on the second phase, a crucial phase, the disarmament of Hamas, etc. That's the key part of it, of why they're meeting now. There's also a diplomatic conference in Sussex that's happening. We're already shipping £20 million of aid on water, sanitation and hygiene services to Gaza. There's an amusing who got the best deal here overnight on Twitter. So Bridget Phillipson, of course, running to be the leader. She's, I know Mark White's mentioned it, but we must mention it again because it's so amusing. She's the Education Secretary. She said yesterday in interviews that the UK has done a very key role behind the scenes in shaping what's been happening in Gaza, and that was given short shrift by Mike Huckabee, who's the US ambassador to Israel, saying, "I assure you, she's delusional. She can thank Donald Trump any time." Just to set the record straight. And then this morning, a very interesting tweet again, all happening on Twitter. Steve Witkoff, who's the US Special Envoy for the Middle East, he's saying that he wants to acknowledge the vital role of the UK in assisting and coordinating efforts that led us to this historic day in Israel. So there we are. Steve Witkoff is ally of Donald Trump, but so is Mike Huckabee, thanking us. And then he goes on, in particular, I want to recognise the incredible input and tireless efforts of the NSA, Jonathan Powell. He's got his own issues, hasn't he, Mark, with China?
Well, Christopher, listen, I guess it's part of my brief that suspicion is a big sort of element of the way I treat so many stories. But come on, with your political hat on, that's suspicious, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why suddenly name Jonathan Powell, of all people, in a tweet, when that same said Jonathan Powell is in rather difficult circumstances because of the collapse of this Chinese spy trial?
He's under fire, and of course he's also a retread from the Blair days, isn't he?
He was there from beginning to end of the Blair years.
Yes, he really was. So you've got these two individuals from the past being brought back by this government, our UK government.
Yeah, the last retread from the Blair.
So what's your assessment then, Christopher?
Well, I've never heard Jonathan Powell's name mentioned close to the Israel story until now. I do note that he's under real fire over the Chinese issue.
Andrew, no doubt.
He's the National Security Advisor. He's also the Foreign Affairs Advisor to the Prime Minister.
And a special advisor too, by the way. So, I mean, MPs can't question him. He's going to appear in front of the Foreign Affairs Committee in secret, which is odd. Well, what's Michael Ellis think about that?
Well, I was going to say, Chris, I think between you and Mark, no doubt you'll ask the question, what exactly was this very significant role that the UK played? Because I don't know what that role was, and neither does anybody else. And frankly, the Israelis don't seem to be accepting it. Their Deputy Foreign Minister was quite clear that it was a load of rubbish.
We've got a briefing this morning with the PM spokesman at 11:30. We'll make sure we ask.
Yeah, and also, of course, there was fury in the White House over Britain recognising the Palestinian state. And let's face it, the Prime Minister almost waited till Air Force One was in the air from the very successful state visit.
And I suppose we should emphasise, it isn't just about recognising a Palestinian state, it's the timing of it. And they'll always say, well, hundreds of other countries have recognised. Fine, but they didn't recognise a Palestinian state, most of those 100 countries, when hostages were being held and when this conflict was in progress. It's the message, it's the optics, it's the signal that you sent at a really sensitive time. And I'm afraid Marco Rubio, the American Secretary of State, gave an interview on television in which he made it quite clear that the Macron and Starmer actions a couple of months ago were unhelpful.
Well, because they are two key members of the UN Security Council. They're not just, common or garden sort of other countries around the world. They are, big nations in terms of their security profile around the world. So to recognise a Palestinian state in this way, I think has been seen as particularly unhelpful.
Isn't there an old saying, though, Andrew, that, now let me get this right, success has many fathers, failure is an orphan.
That's right. But wasn't there also a suspicion the timing for Starmer was about calming down the unrest on his Labour backbenches, because he's in increasingly political difficulties. But there's a big... the Muslim vote that they used to take for granted is disintegrating for the Labour Party, so this was a big step.
And that's the conjecture behind the motivation. I mean, look, I want Britain to play a leading role. It has every ability to play a leading role, and, you know, as someone who loves this country, I want it to punch above its weight. But that's a different thing from actually succeeding in doing so. And I just don't think it's played a role here, because I think it's been considered to be partisan. If you're going to play a neutral role where both sides will be happy to talk to you and you can actually get things done, you have to be accepted by both sides, and the Israelis don't see it.
Michael, do we want to play a neutral role? Do we want to be on the side of the only democratic state in the Middle East, or do we want to be on the side of terrorists?
Exactly.
And it isn't just recognising the Palestinian state that has been Starmer's misstep, if you like.
Yep.
We've also banned Israeli soldiers from training at a particular military academy.
Yep.
There's been rollbacks on particular arms deals that we're willing to do with Israel, even though they are key to our
That's right,
security.
Miriam, you've hit the nail on the head.
The government wants to have its cake and eat it, or a less generous interpretation. It's being two-faced.
Well, I think it's really been one-faced, because it's shown its face completely against Israel by listing those things that you've just done as an example of that. And I think that's going to be a lasting legacy, I'm sorry to say, and a negative one. And I don't think it's going to play well in the long arc of history. I think Britain's role here has been positively unhelpful in advancing peace.
And it's already happening. I don't think we're being told by what Israel's up to. I don't recall the UK being told about the bombing of Doha, which started this 6 weeks.
We're not trusted.
We're not trusted anymore. That is what has changed. We're
That's a disaster.
Allies, aren't we?
Yeah, we're allies.
But whether we're actually being told, we have finding things out for the Americans, is what I can make.
Yeah.
And don't you think, Chris, there is an element that Starmer has got a real problem with the Labour vote, with Labour MPs rebelling, and the rise of these independent Muslim candidates who expect to fill dozens of constituencies next time. Gaza will be the big issue.
Yeah, senior figures on the Labour front bench are at risk next time. Notably Wes Streeting, who
Angela Rayner.
Angela Rayner.
She's not on the front bench anymore.
Quite right. But
Shabana Mahmood, the new Home Secretary.
Yeah, and part of the future of the party post-Starmer, which everyone will be thinking about next election, when the PM is 65 years old, who's going to follow him? He says he'll fight the next election, but how long into the next term will he serve if he wins it?
Yeah.
It's not clear at all, but it's interesting how it all plays back here. I think, the recognition of Palestine is a problem, I think, for UK-Israeli relations.
Oh, definitely that. Definitely that. And it's... Look, I mean, the job of Prime Minister is a very difficult one. Let's make that absolutely clear. And I think it's... this is why Prime Ministers tend to love to go gallivanting abroad. They absolutely... Not only are they treated extremely well, but it gets them away from the fractious UK political scene and top journalists asking difficult questions.
Particularly this one.
Particularly Chris and Mark. But you can't blame them for that. Netanyahu does show how really difficult, how well you can run a very difficult operation with the fractures they have in the Israeli democratic system, the Knesset and the factionalized parties and so on. It's not easy to keep that sort of thing together.
To what extent do you think, is this Trump's piece? I mean, or is it being overplayed by the MAGA brigade in America? Or would Biden have got this far?
No. No, I think Biden wouldn't have done. But I think the only two people who've been consequential in this are Trump and Netanyahu.
I was going to say it's Netanyahu's piece as well.
Yeah, it is Netanyahu's piece.
He has been responsible for demolishing that ring of fire around Israel that has just
extraordinary.
Bit by bit been taken apart from the threat in Lebanon, from the threat from Iran,
That's right.
the threat obviously in Gaza, and also to an extent in Syria and Iraq as well. And
That's right.
Yemen, of course, as well, has been taking the fight to them. So,
Mark, do you think that it's a little bit premature to call this a peace? It's certainly a ceasefire, it's certainly a return of the hostages, which should be celebrated. But you've just relayed all the things that Israel has done to weaken their enemies over the last couple of years. But perhaps we'll therefore see 2 or 3 years of peace before those enemies build themselves back up again. But the ideologies haven't changed. The underlying fractures have not changed.
that is true. It's to be hoped, though, if a robust enough process is underway, as we've spoken before about, people were very, very sceptical about the lasting peace in Northern Ireland a decade or two ago. And we're pretty much, you know, there over that period of time. And I think you mentioned it there, Miriam, the way in which they've been able to dismantle and degrade so many of the threats against Israel does provide an element of stability going forward. But I think probably one of the most important issues, and this has got to be down to Donald Trump, is the way in which the Gulf Arab states in particular seem very invested now in this process going forward, in a way that they haven't been in the past. So with them behind any kind of process, steering it along, ensuring that the hiccups that there will be along the way are addressed and dealt with, it's possible that this could just be long-lasting, sustained.
Chris, before we go to our next guest.
Just
Chris.
very quickly, I've got some readout here from number 10 on the role of Jonathan Powell in this situation. Speaks to
how very quick.
To Wickoff almost daily. He was at the White House having meetings with Netanyahu when Netanyahu was meeting with Trump. Jonathan Powell was also in Egypt last week while negotiations were being finalised. So there we are.
Well, how come then Jonathan Powell signalled the recognition of the Palestinian state?
Yeah.
He was talking to the US the whole time.
And do we think that other nations didn't have their representatives in the region and were liaising as well? Was it just the UK? No. So why was Jonathan Powell singled out by Mr. Witkoff?
I don't buy it. I don't buy it.
They make it. The more they make this man the story, number 10, the more vulnerable he is, because he's in a lot of trouble, I think, over the China spy story, which we will be talking about.
And briefly over the weekend, he only really speaks to Keir Starmer. He doesn't really share much of what's going on with colleagues, according to the report in the Sunday Times.
I should just say as well, we're looking at the images, obviously, the right-hand side of the screen of the main chamber in the Knesset there as we await Donald Trump's address
to Parliament. Will there be a standing ovation when
Without
he walks
a
in?
doubt.
Even when he just walks in, there'll be a standing
Several,
ovation.
I would imagine. But just to let you know, there's a delay in the sense that he is meeting as we speak with some of the families of the hostages in that Parliament building. So he's sitting. They are, putting questions to him as well. I'm sure they will be very grateful. As I said, we were saying before, of course, there are many people around the world that have their opinions, quite negative opinions of Donald Trump. That's not shared across Israel.
Well,
he is seen as being
the
absolutely
signs on Hostage Square saying Trump Nobel Prize.
Of course.
But don't worry, it went to the opposition leader in Venezuela.
But I think she has said that she thinks Trump should get it next year. And of course, the applications had to be in by the 31st of January, and Trump had only just been inaugurated. It's a little bit premature.
I'm sure the Venezuelan leader was very worthy winner, whatever she did.
Well, let's talk now. We can cross to the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, the former Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, Fleur Hassan-Nahoum. Fleur, thank you so much for coming on to join us this morning. What's your reaction to today's scenes?
Well, I have to say, we never thought we'd get to this point. We never thought that Hamas would hand over all of the living hostages, because it was their key to survival. And what President Trump, along with Netanyahu, have managed to pull off is nothing short of miraculous. And, there's been a lot of talk about, could Biden have done the same deal? No, he couldn't have. Because what Biden presented was basically to Israel, you retreat and maybe we can get out 2, 3, 4 hostages, a few days, drab them out for the next 6 months. And Trump took a completely different approach. He said to Qatar, these people, Hamas, are a liability to you. You want a good relationship with the US. You want all these trade deals with us. You want a wonderful security arrangements with us. You've got to get these people to sign and release the hostages, no compromise. And that's why it was different. And that's why we got to this day.
And Fleur, we've heard talk about potential disruptions to the ceasefire, which could come potentially from Hamas. But for now, at least, a very hopeful mood there in Jerusalem.
Yes, you were quite right earlier when you said this doesn't mean this is peace. Remember, in 2005, we withdrew from Gaza and gave the whole strip of land to the Palestinians so that they could build what they said they wanted, an autonomous region, a state, whatever you want to call it. And instead they built a terror base when Hamas came into power. Now this jihadi ideology is still very much there. But what Trump has done, and this is what I've been dreaming about for a number of years because I was very involved with Abraham Accords, is he's brought in the moderate Sunni countries, the ones, I may add, that have de-radicalized their own societies. In the Emirates, they got rid of the Muslim Brotherhood about 10, 15 years ago. In Saudi Arabia, since 9/11, they've been cleaning out their country from this very toxic jihadi ideology of the Wahhabis, who are their Muslim Brotherhood. And everybody understands that it's the Islamic Republic of Iran that is the toxic Islamic influence in the region. And what Trump did, starting off with the Abraham Accords in 2020, and what he's continuing to do now, is a new Middle East order that gets people together, countries together that want peace and prosperity, against the countries that want destruction and jihadism. And that's what he's doing. And if he manages to bring in these forces into Gaza, then maybe there's a chance of quiet and eventually peace.
And Fleur, Israelis will be celebrating today of one accord, but we know that there are political disagreements within Israel. Some of them have spilled over onto the streets in the last few years. Do you think this unity will last, or will there come a time again for questions about what the next stage should be in Israeli politics?
Well, it's a very difficult question. There is a moment of unity, just the way that there was on October 7th, when the whole country understood that we have real enemies and we shouldn't be divided so much internally. It depends. Will there be an election soon? Is Netanyahu going to keep running? There's so many questions, but what there is a momentum now. I just heard from Israeli media that there's even talk that Netanyahu is going to go now to the peace conference in Sharm el-Sheikh,
yes, he
which
is.
he wasn't due to do, and crazy talk that maybe the Indonesian president may be coming to Israel in the next few days. Now, if there's momentum with Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim country in the world, they're not Arabs, they're Muslims, and Saudi Arabia, all this can really contribute to a new region. And Israeli unity is something that we have to work on, something that I work on very strongly. It's always been our challenge because Jewish people, we disagree a lot, but ultimately today is a moment to celebrate. And I have to mention that this has come at a very high price. We've lost a lot of soldiers, a lot of young men and women to get to this point. And one more thing, we've let out 200 terrorists with blood on their hands. One of them stabbed my friend, who's a dual British-Israeli citizen, Kay Wilson, 18 times and killed her friend in front of her. Her stabber and the killer of her friend was let out in this deal. So we always have to pay the biggest price for peace, but we're always ready to pay that price if only we had partners that are willing to go on that journey with us.
In the crawl personally, to think that brutal man is now going to be free.
Yes.
But it's something you have to do.
Well, it's something that Israel's always been prepared to do. We've always been prepared to sacrifice, not just lives, but sacrifice anything for the sake of quiet and peace. We're a peaceful country. We just want to get on with it. People love life here. The other side, unfortunately, is a cult of death. They say to their people, they educate their children, and they say to them, the best thing you can achieve in your life is to martyr yourself for the cause. And we teach songs of peace in our schools. And so that's the difference. But if we can actually change the leadership of the Palestinian people, the Palestinians deserve better leadership. They deserve their Gandhi. They deserve their Mandela. Where is that person? With that person, Israel could make peace with. Unfortunately, what we had is Arafat, Mahmoud Abbas paying pensions to terrorists, and of course, Hamas that make it very clear that all they want is to destroy the state of Israel.
Now, Fleur, how much do Israelis think about foreign opinion? We've seen opinion amongst many Western societies really harden against Israel over the last 2 years, despite the atrocities that you endured on October the 7th. Is that something that bothers the average Israeli, or something that they don't really give a second thought to?
No, we do. Nobody wants to be isolated. Nobody wants to be demonized. And what we've been seeing, not just from the protests on the streets, but from the mainstream media, that they've essentially become the spokespeople for a genocidal terrorist group that started a war. They've been, quoting their figures. They've been showing the images of Al Jazeera, which is a poison machine, and that does affect it. That's on an ideological or an emotional level. On a practical level, we have Israeli soldiers who are scared to travel amongst other countries to the UK in case they get arrested for fighting for their country. So yes, we are concerned about that. Hopefully now things will change a little bit, but I'm not sure, because this weekend in your country, you have continuing demonstrations after the ceasefire. What are they demonstrating against? When you scratch the surface, the problem is not just Israel's, the problem is civilizational. We are currently going through a civilizational clash the way we did with Nazism in the 1930s. And that civilization that is fighting against the free world is Islamic jihadi fundamentalists. And you have, unfortunately, a prime minister who won't even say Islamic fundamentalism, won't even say jihadi fundamentalism. And until you can actually identify the problem, which is not just our problem, it's your problem too, it's the West's problem, we're not going to be able to start overcoming that main enemy of the free world.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. That's Fleur Hassan Nahum, the former Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. Mark White, you've just got some... you can tell us a little bit about what President Trump is going to say when he speaks to the Israeli Parliament.
Yep, a hopeful and conciliatory speech, it seems, from some of the excerpts that we've got already ahead of that speech. President Trump will tell the Knesset Israel has won all that it can be won by force of arms. He said it's time to translate these victories against terrorists on the battlefield into the ultimate prize of peace and prosperity for the entire Middle East. He said the total focus of Gazans must be on restoring the fundamentals of stability, safety, dignity, and economic development. And another important element of this, he says, even to Iran, whose regime has inflicted so much death on the Middle East, the hand of friendship and cooperation is always open.
Interesting.
I think very interesting, yeah. I mean, there's no doubt
that's
about it.
conciliatory on all counts.
And we're hearing it, the information that we were getting there from your last guest about the leader in Indonesia heading to Israel, the biggest Muslim population in the world. We know about all these Gulf Arab states that are now invested in this process in a way they never were before. Netanyahu, after a phone call between him and the Egyptian leader, is now going to go to Sharm el-Sheikh with President Trump. President Trump was in on that call as well. So things certainly looking very hopeful about what will be a difficult and protracted process ahead. People were saying this was the easy part, the release of the hostages. Clearly for Hamas, it's not the easy part because, that was their last bargaining chip, really, that is being handed over now to Israel. So they've had to be given guarantees going forward that there will be a process after this. And this, from everything we're hearing now from President Trump in the speech he's giving, from all of the news that's coming through about the other elements of this process going forward that appear to be falling into place, it does have an air of optimism about it.
But that process will require leadership on the ground in Gaza. It's very clear that Hamas can't be part of that. That's one of the conditions of the deal. But who will provide that leadership? There might be some oversight from this international committee, but they need some Palestinian technocrats, political leaders or others to make this deal work.
Well, Hamas has said that it will relinquish power, but to another Palestinian authority.
Yeah.
However, I think that's why the Gulf Arab states are important here, because I think they are the one element that Hamas will probably be willing to trust here in terms of an interim authority. Tony Blair less so, of course. But, their involvement, I think, is key to this.
It's interesting what Mark says, because about Indonesia, and in fact the Indonesian head of government is travelling to the region. They are one of the countries that did not walk out of Netanyahu's speech at the UN General Assembly a week or two ago, which was noteworthy because that was sort of grown-up politics, stayed and listened. And that's more of what we need, and we're getting from the Persian Gulf region states, the UAE and Bahrain and the like, that type of leadership, which is really going to be consequential and make a big difference. And when President Trump speaks in the Knesset now, and it's interesting to note, Miriam and Andrew, that the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, was actually in recess, and they've been called back for this special session, rather like one of our recalls of parliament. And they had to have a vote on that. And I believe yesterday, because it's a rule of the Israeli parliament, that you have to speak Hebrew in the parliament, and they had to have a vote to allow President Trump to speak in English.
Amazing.
So they fortunately that vote was
unanimous.
I think it was carried. Whether it was unanimous, I don't know, but I think it would have been an amusing attempt.
Yeah, please let's not have any Hebrew attempt from Trump.
We haven't got a translator standing by, so.
I'm looking now at the list. There's some detail of the 13 hostages released. I think tomorrow's papers will be about two things, won't they? The summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, but also those who've been arrested, aged between 21 and 38, so they're quite relatively young people here.
Well, a lot of them are at the festival, of course.
Well, that's right.
I think all of them are under 40.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you go through the list, I mean, for example, Bar Cooperstein, 23, security guard, stayed behind to tend the wounded and then was taken hostage.
Gosh.
So each of them have extraordinary stories that they will be talking about in coming days. Joseph Chaim Abana, 25, taken hostage again at the Supernova Music Festival, helped paramedics transfer wounded people and then was abducted. So they were trying to save other people and then they were abducted. This is part of the human story which will develop, and we'll hear more and more about this week. Real heroes, I think. We've got others too. Elkanah Bodok, 36. They wanted to open an ice cream shop in Tel Aviv before they're captured. So many dreams cut short.
Chris, I should just say we're just hearing that Sir Keir Starmer and President Emmanuel Macron have met in Sharm el-Sheikh. We're getting pictures cut of that, which we should be able to bring you anytime. Important, of course, because Messrs Starmer and Macron are the two leaders, those members of the UN Security Council who recognised the Palestinian state, much to the annoyance of the Americans and the Israelis.
Macron's just lost his fifth prime minister.
Yeah, and the Fifth Republic could be under threat, and of course Starmer's got his own reverse Midas touch issue at home,
problems
according to critics. So
that's an interesting photograph of those two together. Well, nobody else wants to be with them.
Well, no, but they want to be on the world stage. The world stage is when they're both.
Well, that's what they both like to do, don't they? First opportunity to be abroad. The Prime Minister's gone.
I think we've got some images of Tony Blair arriving now.
There we are.
In Sharm el-Sheikh. There he is.
God, it didn't take him long. And of course, but the President has said about whether Blair should be involved, he needs to assess his popularity. But he better not do it in this country.
I think that's,
he's not very popular in Britain.
That's the Egyptian President, El-Sisi.
That's Sisi, well, who's hosting the summit, of course.
Yes.
So Miriam, this is Tony Blair arriving.
And who is belatedly agreed to the inclusion of Benjamin Netanyahu in that summit as well.
Quite extraordinary. Matthew Talbot's joined us. Matthew Talbot, former Labour Party advisor. You pleased to see Tony Blair there?
I don't know. I think if I put my personal politics aside, I think he's clearly played a part, according to Donald Trump and Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. It seems to have been somewhat important. I'm not sure about this idea that he's going to be some sort of viceroy who isn't really based there and is going to sort of play a role in this sort of thing. But I think, look, it's a time for people, I hope, to come together. It's an incredibly important day, especially for those hostages who are now released and will go back to their families. And I think, a massive win, really, for the President of the United States.
Michael, don't you think they need somebody a bit... I mean, Tony Blair's not been in government, in office, since 2007.
He hasn't in this country, but of course he did do the quintet after he left office, where he involved himself in Middle East affairs for some years thereafter.
Arguable whether he achieved much.
Well, and you're right that, of course, the conflict has continued through the generations, in fact. I mean, look, if I wish them well. I mean, anybody from any side of the political spectrum who can actually improve the life for the people in that region, that's a good thing. So I wish them well. We can have varying degrees of expectation. And as President Trump has said, I mean, he likes Tony, and from what I understand, Tony is a personally likeable chap. But I think it takes more than that. I think it's obviously going to take both sides understanding that you mean them well. And there aren't very many people who can play with that deck of cards. There just aren't. And if he is someone who can please both sides, then that's a rare bird, and we'll have to wait and see. But you know, I would be sceptical.
And Matthew, obviously today is about what's happening in Israel and the Middle East, but domestic politics doesn't go away. And one of the things that has tied the hands of Israel, and to a lesser extent the United States, is the opinion of the Western left in terms of how they perceive Israel as acting, the attitude they have towards Hamas and towards the Palestinian cause. And of course, you know, we believe in free speech. We want people to be able to express those opinions, however opposite they are. But nevertheless, the way that this conflict has spilled out into the streets of Britain, with legitimate protesters almost joining hands with Islamist radicals, has made it very difficult for our country to be on the right side in this conflict.
I think it's in large part ignorance, and people probably mean well on sort of both sides and see it in the lens that they wish to see it in. The most formative experience I had in politics was going to Israel and Palestine not long before the terror attacks on October the 7th. And there's something to be said about speaking to people out there, whether that be politicians, academics, members of the public, the police, in both areas, and you come away with, I certainly did, with a different mindset. And I think, look, there's legitimate protests of the way that Israel has responded and whether that is truly proportionate. I think there's obviously a place to call out awful groups like Hamas, who are clearly terrorist groups and are bad faith actors. So there's a balance to be struck that not many people maybe on the Western left do. And I think domestically, you talk about domestic politics, whether it was the right time to recognise Palestine, certainly in this country, it left a bad taste in my mouth, the idea that this was being done as a punishment to Israel rather than a reward for what we want to see of a two-state solution in the future. And whether that was to appease domestic politics here and potential voter basis for Keir Starmer, I think maybe was the case.
It's interesting, because when we spoke to the former Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, she referred to the marches in our major cities, London, and she was pretty contemptuous and angry about it. Why are they doing it? What for? What's the purpose? Every Saturday.
Do you know, as a slight defence, people feel helpless, right? I will give people that. I think you cannot look on Twitter without seeing babies dead. It is awful, absolutely awful, regardless of whatever reaction it's been done to push back on. So people feel helpless and they will march. I think even the other week, I thought what would have been a real show of strength actually across the board was for there to be a banner at the front of the protest following the attacks in Manchester saying we stand with Manchester's Jews. This is not an anti-Jewish protest, or it certainly should not be an anti-Jewish protest. This is in support of the Palestinian people and the right of their statehood and to stop the war and the killing on all sides, but also this is not to make people here feel uncomfortable. That's certainly where my politics.
But unfortunately, it has, and you know, what Matthew says is perfectly understandable. But it has made the very small Jewish community in this country extremely uncomfortable, and in fact, scared, and genuinely scared. And of course, they've been now the subject of a terrorist attack, which Labour peer Lord Glassman described as the first time in this country that Jews have been murdered for being Jews for hundreds of years. And, many of these flags that we've seen shown would actually be these marches, and I think they are hate marches. Many of those flags are actually banned in the Middle East. They're banned in some of these states that we're talking about that are going to be at Sharm el-Sheikh. You'd actually be arrested in those countries for flying those flags. And you can understand why it is that people feel that in the context of what else is going on in the world, Why is it this relentless focus for the past 2 years when, for example, we don't have these sorts of marches for 1 million Uyghurs killed and so on, and we're seeing some pictures.
If you listen on the radio now, we've got images now of the Palestinian prisoners being released, predictably mobbed by hundreds of people. They're being released off coaches. They're all wearing distinctive scarves. They're being warmly embraced. There's lots of noise. There's euphoria. Of course there is. There's some 1,200, we think. It could be as many as 2,000.
I should say that this is the first coach load into Gaza. This is now arriving in the Gaza Strip. This is different to the other I would say more contentious Palestinian prisoners, those that have been convicted of some pretty horrific crimes, including murder, as one of your guests highlighted how one of her friends was stabbed to death by one of these convicted murderers now being released. And that's understandably very, very difficult for Israel, for the Israeli population to have to stomach. What we're seeing here are some of the 1,700 Gazans who were detained after the 7th of October. Another bus behind this one, so arriving in the Gaza Strip. So, of course, while we've been focusing quite rightly on the hostages who have been released after 738 days in captivity from the Palestinian side, an important day for them as they see many of their loved ones and residents of this area returned as well to jubilant scenes inside the Gaza Strip itself. I should say, while we continue to monitor these pictures, that President Trump's daughter, Ivanka Trump, has just arrived in the Knesset main chamber.
So he's not far behind.
To a standing ovation. So you can imagine what it's going to be like when Donald Trump enters the Knesset Assembly.
Because her husband, in particular, Jared Kushner, has been quite key to the talks and negotiations.
Well, yes, exactly. He has been part of that sort of delegation in the region, front and centre of those efforts to get this peace process underway. So a standing ovation for Ivanka Trump. We can only imagine what the reception for Donald Trump will be.
Office sweep, how long Donald Trump's standing ovation lasts. It's going to be a very long one.
It's going to be quite a few. I think it'll be minutes long. Yeah. Minutes long.
And so it should be.
Yeah, I mean, he has been a game changer here. There's no doubt about that, and he really has made the weather in this crisis. He's made things happen, and he's done that, no doubt, by knocking heads together, and he's done that by a robust and uncompromising stance. But he has taken it upon himself to be a peacemaker in a number of conflicts around the region. And he clearly is interested in the Nobel Peace Prize for 2025. And
he started lobbying already.
He has. And I think President Trump is one of
Donald Trump, we're going to go straight back to the Knesset because Donald Trump is walking into the Israeli parliament. And if you're listening to radio, people are on their feet. Here's the applause.
He's walking up to the platform there, going to take a seat on the left-hand side and moving over. Going to take the central position. No, he's moving over to the right-hand side of the platform.
And as we predicted, there's a standing ovation. Everybody's on their feet that we can see.
And Michael, you were saying there are 120 members of the Knesset. Israel, of course, a tiny country in geographical terms, and population of something like 9 million.
That's right, and a country the size of Wales. And when you consider that they are a country of that size, and surrounded as they have been, since the late 40s, since their foundation, by hostility and enemies, they have progressed extremely well. And what I think is going to happen, first of all, I wouldn't be surprised if President Trump actually will have to hear another speech first to introduce him. I suspect that's what will have to happen.
But I can give you the order, Michael, actually. The Speaker of the Knesset, Amir Ohana, is going to speak first, followed by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and then the Leader of the Opposition, Yair Lapid, all building up to the main act.
The crescendo.
And those politicians will no doubt want to speak for as long as possible.
And in Hebrew.
Well, yes. I think, but you know, what's extraordinary about President Trump is that he's the sort of person who always wants to climb mountains, if I can put it that way. That sort of high achiever who wants to have another mountain to climb, to another success to notch on the belt. And you see that with highly successful people. And he's made it his business to make peace happen in various regions of conflict around the world. This is a really hard one. Ukraine is another really hard one.
On that point on peacemaker, I think he is a peacemaker. I think he's 79 years old, he's a grandfather, and he sees in Ukraine, he sees the ledger both sides. He sees we know the Russian deaths, but also the Ukraine deaths are huge, they're not reported.
No, and of course, when you are in your second term as president and you're term limited,
legacy.
It's a legacy thing. You know, there's nowhere else to go. There's no other job to have. It's all now about the legacy and what you can achieve.
Well, we've seen a real clash of strategies or ideologies, haven't we? Because Trump clearly subscribes to this idea that peace comes through strength, which is something that Netanyahu said a lot. And yet the Western powers, the kind of liberal nations of the EU, want to negotiate. They see this as just a territorial dispute that can be resolved with the right negotiators, with enough Tony Blairs. But actually, Trump's strategy is that if you say what you want, you threaten the right things, and you show that you're willing to follow through on that threat, then that is the position through which you can achieve some sort of ceasefire.
I just think, Miriam, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. That's absolutely what it is. And I think that he believes in that muscular diplomacy. Basically, the only language is one of strength. And I think many in the West have forgotten that. They don't ascribe to that. They buckle to pressure. And if intimidated or if threatened in some way, either economically or diplomatically, politically, or whatever it might be, they have a tendency to buckle. But if, you know, especially in that region, the only language really that is understood is the language of strength. And, you know, that may be unsophisticated by Western European standards, but it is, at least in the eyes of some. But for one, I think that Netanyahu and Trump are of that same school.
Is there any precedent for foreign heads of state speaking in the Israeli Knesset, or do we know if he's the first one?
I think so, yes. Over the years, without a doubt.
Yeah, sure they have.
We've seen another standing ovation.
Well, that was for Netanyahu.
That's good.
Well, and I think this is going to be fairly...
That was a standing ovation for the standing ovation.
We're going to see...
But Netanyahu's standing ovation was not as long as the president's.
No.
Because, of course, he's a very divisive figure in Israel, obviously, and in that parliament. And it's a coalition parliament. And there are some members of his coalition who don't like this deal, Mark White.
Well, that's true, but I think the majority are certainly full square behind this deal. But yes, you're right. On some of the further right fringes of the Israeli government, they're not at all happy.
No.
Matthew, let's bring you in, because you were talking earlier about how a lot of the demonstrations we've seen on the street, and certainly the more violent aspects of them, have been led by ignorance. And we've certainly seen that, particularly amongst younger people, I have to say, a lack of understanding about the history of Israel, how this conflict has developed over, well, not just hundreds, but actually thousands of years, and a failure to understand that Israel is a democratic society, that people do have full human rights, people of different races and religions. What's next? How do we educate British people, young people, about what's really going on in the Middle East so they can make their minds up, rather than just being educated by propaganda, which seems to be happening a lot of the time?
Well, that's a $10 million question for sure. I think, again, you have to, you have to go out and experience it for yourself. I had a very different view until I went, and, you know, I'm not naive enough to be taken in by some of the views that were being put forward. I could see that there was a certain slant being put on things, but ultimately, you speak to anyone on any side of this conflict, nobody wants this. Nobody wants war, nobody wants death. Only those that, you know, it suits their purpose as a weak politician to do so on both sides. And I think that's what I came away from this with, is that it was really a tool for weak politicians that couldn't get things done to blame the other side, and this is what we've had for sort of centuries in the Middle East. And I think actually on the point Michael made, and yourself, I think it's a very Thatcher type sort of thing to show strength through diplomacy through strength. And I think it's useful to have Donald Trump in this situation. I think if we were all doing that, that is how war actually perpetuates. If you've got strong men all around the world, that's very dangerous. But it's his victory, and we have to be clear about that. Even on the Labour side, this has not been brought about by people like Benjamin Netanyahu, who at times has been a bit of a blocker. He's had to have been dragged to this position by Donald Trump, as have Hamas.
Chris, we've just heard Jared Kushner and his wife, of course, is Trump's daughter, being given a standing ovation. One of the things that really stands out about Trump's core team is how many of his family are involved. That would not be done over here, I don't think. That would be seen as nepotism, but it's been one of his core strengths.
People talk about the court of King Donald, don't they? But, I mean, they really are. I mean, yes, you see there Jared Kushner there. I mean, there's... You know, what's he up to in the Middle East? I mean, you know, he's definitely spreading the support for his own family by giving them roles. But I guess it means you have the ear of the president. So the value of Jared Kushner is he can WhatsApp President Trump and get an immediate answer. So that's the value of him. That's how, of course, the kind of transactional way that Donald Trump does politics.
And it's also the trust, isn't it? You see members of your own family as an extension of yourselves. There's far less temptation for backstabbing, for political competitiveness. You can trust your family more than anyone else. That's normally the case.
It's outside the box diplomacy. It's not how it's normally done, and that's maybe why Joe Biden and others may have not got this far, because he has used the muscle of America to make this happen.
But they just do things differently, this Trump administration. I mean, look, you had Trump virtually having the whole world at the opening of his Scottish golf course. Yeah. And the BBC were there, and ITV were there. Everybody was there. I mean, worldwide publicity. Yeah. He invited various politicians there. His son-in-law's there now, presumably making a bit of money.
See, with Trump, though, I mean, it is about personal relationships, Andrew, isn't it, with him? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually how most of the world operates. It's not actually how we operate in the UK and hasn't been for many years. But, you know, it is about personal relationships. And if President Trump likes somebody, he wants to do business with them and he wants to solve issues with them. And it's about personally bonding with someone.
If he doesn't like Keir Starmer.
And if he doesn't.
I was there in Turnberry this year.
At last, somebody does.
I was there in Turnberry this year. We walked into this oval of his setup around the President and Keir Starmer, and the US flag was on the left, the senior flag in terms of flag rules. It was definitely Donald Trump's show on UK soil. That's how he does it.
Yeah. Does he really like him, though, Chris? Come on.
He's a Brit. By his family, he's a Brit. Well,
and he got a state visit out of him. He got to squeeze the flesh of King Charles.
Yeah.
Oh, he loved that. Absolutely. Our state visits are diplomacy, you know, to the platinum standard. You know, you asked Andrew about previous visits to the Knesset. I remember David Cameron speaking at the Knesset in the 2010 Parliament, at some point in the 2010 Parliament, and they had, I think, Javier Milei, the Argentine president, only recently addressed the Knesset. So they have had leaders from around the world. The German Chancellor has also spoken there. So they get their leaders and to visit. But Javier Milei, as I say, from Argentina, they're very close, Israel and Argentina, as are Israel and India. They have excellent relations, and Germany. So I think this, however, is a game changer, and they've come back from recess for this. There's a Jewish holiday of Sukkot, it's called, which is in progress. They'd normally be in recess. They've come back just to hear President Trump and several minutes of standing ovation.
And then the standing ovation still continues.
I don't know what they're clapping for at the moment.
We were talking before about, you know, Trump versus Biden, whether Biden could have got a deal like this over the line. I think one of the things that President Trump did, and he did it in his first term, of course, was reach out to the Gulf Arabs and others in the region. He wanted that constructive relationship with those neighbours of Israel. And remember, it was Trump that pushed the Abraham Accords, as he's described them as. And of course, that was on a path towards these neighbours of Israel really strengthening and bringing forward a sort of more constructive relationship with Israel. And it was, you know, it's been suggested that that might have been one of the reasons behind the push by Hamas to launch the October 7th attacks.
Absolutely.
Just ahead of actually Saudi Arabia signing the Abraham Accords as well.
Indeed. And I think that what really makes a difference, of course, is I think Winston Churchill was, in the 1950s, he was criticised for talking to the Soviet Union. And he said in response, well, we don't need to talk peace with people who are already our friends. And that's, of course, in his usual eloquent way, how he dealt with that criticism. But the truth is, in order to make peace with long-term enmity, someone needs to break the mould. And I think the Abraham Accords are a fantastic legacy already. But if after this they can be expanded to include other countries, I think it's really going to be a game changer.
Now, Chris, very interesting political moment, because Donald Trump is someone who is deeply unpopular with the British public. I know perhaps not with GBNews viewers, of course, but when polled, the public on the whole do not like Donald Trump. Similar feelings about Netanyahu, similar feelings about somebody like Boris Johnson, people who have colourful, controversial private lives, and perhaps our British sense of sensibility doesn't want to elect people like that. But it's proof again, actually, that you don't need to be a nice person in your private life to be a successful world leader.
I should say to viewers and listeners watching and listening in, now what's been happening now is Donald Trump and several US officials are being introduced, hence the long applause after their speaking. But you're right, Miriam. I think it's judging by their actions, not by their words. Some of Donald Trump's words are deeply offensive, particularly in the past, particularly when you're standing for election, when those hot mic moments occur. They are difficult for Brits to understand how that person can get into office. But I think Americans see this as someone who can get a good deal for Americans, and that's why they're backing him. So it's just, you're judging by their actions, not by their words. That clearly is what's happening here, and that's why you're seeing it. This is surely that has to be the highlight internationally of his political career, possibly his actual highlight of his entire career for Donald Trump in both business and politics. It won't get any better than this.
When he gets a Nobel Prize, it gets better.
But prizes mean nothing. This is
no, it does to him.
I think this is...
It does to him. It does to him. Obama got one, he wants one. And Obama got one in a year of being president.
No one's quite sure why Obama got one, but we'll move on from that.
He would only be the fourth or fifth president to get one, as I recall.
Yeah, but the emotion there, I think, this is
Carter got one.
This is him ending killing, ending suffering by Donald Trump.
Roosevelt.
I think Roosevelt. Obama. And I can't remember who else. But this is a little bit, it's sad. World peace is massive, and it shouldn't be diluted to a case of, an episode of Peace Has Got Talent and a trophy and a few £100,000. And I get that's his sort of MO or whatever, but I found the commentary the last couple of weeks to be a little bit bizarre, really, over the case of whether he deserves it or not. I think ultimately, and this is his victory, but you're also talking about a man who's trying to lock up his political opponents back home when we talk about domestic politics. So I'm going to take off those rose-tinted spectacles just for a moment. Admittedly, this is his day, but the man is certainly not perfect.
And also, it does highlight the weaknesses of democracy. Obviously, a brilliant system in many ways, but Trump's only got 3.5 years left in office. Who knows how long Netanyahu's got, because there's all sorts of other threats to his political tenure, shall we say, once this crisis is resolved. New leaders could come in with completely different views, completely different voter bases, and tear up this agreement or come to different conclusions. I mean, it's very... In a world where you have an electoral cycle that's so short, it's very...
The Israelis have to have an election next year, I think I'm right in saying, in their cycle. Yeah.
And, of course, there'll be some that, if it goes wrong, that's the end of Netanyahu, or is it?
Well, I mean, he has had many lives. He has, he's been incredibly long-lasting and consequential in Israeli politics. He must be about 75 now, I would have thought. But
younger than Trump.
younger than Trump, and of course, you know, we're increasingly seeing octogenarian leaders. But you know, here you have, and Matthew's absolutely right. Of course, no one is perfect, and we all know that all leaders, like all human beings, have flaws. But for today, I think you're seeing now, 20 hostages have been released when they've been detained in appalling conditions for the past 2 years. It looks like the remains, tragically, the remains of most of the other hostages. There's some reports that not all of the remains have been located, which is an absolute tragedy for those families who have lost loved ones. But this is a really consequential day for the history of the Middle East. Like we've been saying, you know, is it going to last? I think it will last President Trump's tenure, because he won't allow it not to. But if it's going to last long term, there have to be other game-changing moments.
And I think actually 3 years, although of course in the grand scheme of things it doesn't seem like a lot, but it's actually a good amount of time to properly embed a process, given that, you know, the move will be to have this interim administration, but then getting a more sort of long-term and sustainable administration in both clearly in Gaza, but also in the West Bank as well, with a view to moving forward in a more constructive way. 3 years is a good amount of time, I think, given the goodwill that there appears to be amongst other partners in the region, in a way that there hasn't been in peace processes, I would suggest, in the past to quite the same extent, then there is a good chance of embedding this properly and getting them on a path to a more stable and prosperous
It's just the hotheads. It's the hotheads.
Always.
The Hamas hotheads who will never come to terms with this, and will still have access to guns and bombs, and the guerrilla campaign can begin straight away.
And Michael, the holy grail here is the so-called two-state solution.
Well, Hamas don't agree with that.
Hamas don't agree, but many Israelis don't either. And there's, I understand that behind the scenes in diplomatic circles, very few people think this is actually a possibility anymore. It's something that world leaders like to say to look like they have a plan, but it's not only the Islamic radicals who don't want Israel to exist, which is obviously a huge barrier to the two-state solution. It's also the way that the Israeli settlements now pepper the West Bank, making it almost impossible to find any kind of new border out of which a Palestinian state could be created.
Well, there have been attempts, as you rightly say, Miriam, and the Oslo Accords was one of them, and there have been multiple attempts to make that work. And frankly, as President Clinton, ex-President Clinton has said, the Palestinians have rejected a lot of those deals over the decades, even when, under President Bill Clinton, you know, there were over 95% of what they wanted was on the table. But look, we have to be positive about this, especially on a day like today. I think there is reason to hope. What needs to really happen, the game changer, this culture of hate and non-acceptance, the way children, for example, are in the Palestinian Authority areas are given textbooks and taught to hate Jews and so on, that's just going to perpetuate for even longer this sort of enmity and hostility. If there's any chance of making progress, it will have to be done by moves like we're seeing today, and by people actually taking brave stances. Look, Anwar Sadat, the then president of Egypt, took a very brave step in the late 70s when he made peace with Israel, and sadly he was assassinated by his own militia in 1981. And so of course was the Israeli Prime Minister Begin at the time. And so agents for peace, leaders who step up and do very brave things in this region have, I'm afraid, come to short shrift because they've tended to be assassinated. And this is what hate does, and we've got to see it change.
Talking of Egypt, we've got a breaking news line out of the Israeli Prime Minister's office, which seems a tad confusing given what we were reporting earlier. But the Israeli Prime Minister's office now saying that Benjamin Netanyahu is not going to go to the peace summit in Sharm el-Sheikh. So let's just wait and see if that is further clarified.
Perhaps he thinks he'd be arrested.
There might be security reasons, but
yeah,
and there could be any number of reasons for that.
Did Egypt sign up for that international arrest warrant?
Well,
yeah, I mean, it may be on advice of his security personnel, given the fact he wasn't going to be attending and suddenly is attending. Yes. Are they happy with the security arrangements? I'm not sure. That hopefully will come out in the minutes ahead, but that certainly seems to be confusing, given that President Trump effectively seems to have got the two together, both him and al-Sisi, the Egyptian president, got them on the phone. And then we got this news that Benjamin Netanyahu was going to travel to Egypt.
But as you know, Mark, the actual deal, the actual peace deal is being signed by a much smaller number of countries, Turkey and Qatar, for example. These countries that are doing the theatre in Sharm el-Sheikh, Britain included, that is about theatre, I have to say. And maybe the security people have said that it's not safe enough, or maybe there are political reasons. But it isn't going to mean that the deal doesn't take place, because the actual deal is being signed with a very much smaller number of countries.
Absolutely, and what's happening in Egypt with these other countries, a lot of the focus on that is actually after the deal, the process, providing that it gets on track and moves forward. It's about the role that they can play in the reconstruction of Gaza, really.
Matthew, we've seen today that the government has committed £20 million to help with that rebuild. Not an enormous amount of money in the grand scheme of things, but an indication that Britain wants to be involved. We see a role for ourselves. Do you think there's any sense of regret within Labour circles of the stance that the Prime Minister has taken over the last 2 years, perhaps now wishing they'd been closer to Trump, closer to Israel?
No, I think the weekend morning round sort of showed that actually, no, we've done the right thing. We've been involved from the start, and we're going to take a little bit of this sort of victory. I mean, we've only been in 14, 15 months as well. I think, you know, Donald Trump, there's plenty to criticise him for. I think it's right to do so, particularly on domestic issues. But again, you have to give him the credit here. And I think, you know, whatever the reason for Benjamin Netanyahu not going, and it may well be theatre, I agree, but how powerful would those pictures be that would be beamed across the world? So it's a huge shame. And I think, again, it says to me he's been dragged there. He doesn't want this. He's I think, at times prolonged this conflict for his own political gains, because if he isn't in office, he's got hundreds of corruption charges he's going to have to face. And I think people have now said this could have been done 6 months ago. This could have been, and that's a failure, not just of Trump at times being an observer, but Joe Biden as well.
We just need to go to Chris Hope, because we think we've got a statement from the Prime Minister.
We've got a statement released moments ago by Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister. He says this: he shares a deep feeling of relief as Ivan Orr and other hostages are released today, but this is a stark reminder of the treatment that's been subject to at the hands of Hamas and the atrocities that shook the world 2 years ago. Having met his family, he says he knows that no one can truly understand the torture and agony they suffered for 2 drawn-out years. And my thoughts are with them. My thoughts are also with the family of Yossi Sharabai, who are still waiting for news. Keir Starmer carries on very briefly. I reiterate my thanks for the tireless diplomatic efforts of the United States, Egypt, Qatar and Turkey. It's now crucial that we work together to implement President Trump's peace plan for Gaza, and that will be my focus in Egypt today. Just finally, commitment to this plan from all parties will be essential to ending the war and building the foundations for a sustainable path to a long-term peace. The UK will continue to the crucial next stage of talks to ensure the implementation of the peace plan. So the focus in Egypt is Gaza. Maybe that's a reason why the Israeli PM won't want to go, maybe, because it's about Gaza and aid more than Israel too.
Absolutely.
I mean, it might rankle somewhat going over there to Sharm el-Sheikh and shaking hands with people who have not been helpful to Israel, shaking hands with the Prime Minister of Spain and the British Prime Minister, and countries that have been actively hostile to Israel.
Countries that want to arrest him.
And countries that want to arrest him. So it isn't actually what matters. That is theatre. It's about President of the United States projecting his world leadership, which is unquestioned. But the actual deal that's been signed between, Qatar and Egypt and Turkey is the key, and Israel is the key one. And talking of leaders, by the way, on our screen there, you see on the right of the picture, sitting on the other side to President Trump, in the middle, I think, is the Speaker of the Israeli Parliament. But that's on the right is the President of Israel, Isaac Herzog, whose father was President of Israel in the 1980s, I think I'm right in saying. He comes from a political family. But in Israel, the President is a ceremonial position as head of state. All the power rests with the Prime Minister, as we know, which is why we never really hear about the President in the news cycle.
Oddly, he had a meeting with Trump. With Starmer.
He did.
Ago.
He came a few weeks ago and met the Prime Minister, and they had a productive meeting, I understand, and he. But his position is very much a ceremonial one. He came and met members of the Jewish community in the UK to offer his support to them.
He also came on GBNews. I met him with Martin.
That's
Dorney.
right. Yes, so he did.
He came into our studio, which was
a man of great discernment and taste.
Absolutely right. He had met them.
I think he was at Oxford
with Sir Keir Starmer. This is back in about a month ago. I mean, we met with Sir Keir Starmer shortly after the bombing.
Just to give you the latest update from the Knesset, there is another standing ovation. We're not quite sure who it's for.
They're a demonstrative parliament.
Yes, they are. Perhaps Netanyahu.
Perhaps this is why we ban clapping in the House of Commons.
It takes so much time.
It actually is a pretty good idea to do that because, once you start, you keep going.
Well, and of course, the first time it happened was when Cameron, of all people, rose to his feet to clap Blair when he left the chamber for the first time.
I'd forgotten that, Andrew. I'd forgotten that.
Yes, he was there.
I think
the applause.
Despite...
And he made his backbenchers get up and join in, and they were not very happy about it.
No. I think despite those aberrations, I think it's a good idea. I would encourage Sir Lindsay Hoyle, Mr. Speaker, to basically stick with it because once you start clapping, then the next person wants to clap for his leader or her leader, and then a bit longer.
It ends up like party conferences.
That's right.
Every line gets a standing
ovation.
You never get anywhere.
That's exactly right.
All the columnists and sketch writers dwell on who gets an ovation and who doesn't.
You're better off banning it altogether.
Exactly.
Well, this of all occasions deserves a round of applause. I mean, crumbs.
We're just being very British. In the Middle East, people are much more demonstrative about how they... But it is a fascinating political system. And you were referring earlier, Michael, to their system of proportional representation, which allows, I think, a party to gain a seat in the Parliament once they receive just 2.5% of the vote,
isn't it?
Which means that any ragtag bunch of people can get together and end up with a seat in Parliament and therefore be key, perhaps, in forming a governing coalition or blocking a government coalition. And this is what's led to this extraordinary instability that's seen election after election after election.
This is one of the things Matthew and I, we could agree on many things, but Matthew and I will agree on, I'm sure, because the mainstream political parties have supported our system, our simple plurality system, as it's called, the first past the post, because with proportional representation, it does tend to favour third parties or smaller parties. And if you take it to a real extreme, as the Israelis do in their system, you're sort of, on paper, it's looking extremely democratic. Even a really small number of votes will get you some representation. How could you complain about that? On the face of it, it looks really fair and really democratic, but what it actually does is creates many minor, tiny little parties with 3 or 4 MPs, and then they get disproportionate strength in a small parliament like the unicameral parliament in Israel, which has only 120 members. So I think Italy had a similar PR system after the war, and they had something like 50 governments in 50 years.
Standard for Italy.
So, well, it's calmed down a bit since then. I don't know whether they made some structural changes.
Just to interrupt you, Michael, Netanyahu's now on his feet, the Israeli Prime Minister. I think he's speaking Hebrew. We're going to double check for you.
Of course, he is a fluent English speaker, spent a lot of time, grew up, I think, in the United States, which I think is probably one of the reasons he's been so successful in building those alliances in America, because he does speak like a native.
A great communicator.
Yeah, so we're going to hear him speak, but in Hebrew. I'm not sure whether we will have a translation. But yeah,
He
fascinating.
is speaking Hebrew, yeah.
I think it tends to depend on the audience. He tends to speak in English if he wants to reach that sort of American audience, but if it's for Israelis,
And this would be this is a very Israeli moment.
Oh yes, I mean this is their moment really, and it's their parliament. So you'd expect him to speak in his native tongue. But you're right, Miriam. He's a great advocate. He was, of course, Israeli ambassador at the UN in New York for many years. I think in the 70s or maybe early 80s. And so...
No great fan of the UN now, is he?
No, and one can understand why. I think, Israel, as the world's only Jewish state, it does get subjected to quite a lot of criticism in the UN, and many would say a disproportionate amount of motions against it and committee hearings against it, sometimes clocking up into the dozens, when other conflict zones are almost never spoken of. But I'm afraid that happens in a lot of places, including in the British Parliament, where there are multiple urgent questions or statements about what's been going on in Israel and Gaza, but very much fewer about China or Sudan or other conflict zones. It's just one of those things, and you can understand why there might be some scepticism towards the UN. But the UN, look, I mean, Matthew talks about politicians not being, being flawless. There's 193 countries in the world. Only about 50 of them are democracies. And so the UN, by its very nature, is mostly populated by countries which are dictatorships and autocracies. And then when you get votes, you've got to look at it in that context. It's as simple as that.
Actually, out of those 50, it's probably the same 6 that have really got the real power and sway to try and get things done. When you look at China and India, I would argue at times, certainly during this conflict, I'd say we're quite impotent on the world stage a lot of the time, and really it's America that do the bidding on behalf of us.
Again, I agree with Matthew on that. We have been pretty impotent in this issue. You know what's sad, and I speak to Arab interlocutors about this, Britain has a real important part that it could play because of its history, ironically because of its imperial past. Also, a lot of the leading families in the region have been educated in the UK. Many, for example, went to Sandhurst. There's the King of Jordan and so on.
Michael, interrupt you. We're going to go back to the Knesset because Netanyahu is now speaking in English.
To the lies against Israel and the United Nations. Thank you for recognizing in your 2020 peace plan our rights in Judea and Samaria. Thank you for recognizing in your 2020 Jewish people our rights in Judea and Samaria, the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people. Thank you for brokering the historic Abraham Accords. Thank you for brokering the historic Abraham Accords. Abraham. Thank you for withdrawing from the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. Thank you for withdrawing from the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. Thank you for supporting Operation Rising Lion and for your bold decision to support Operation Rising Lion and for your bold decision to launch Operation Midnight Hammer. Boy, is that... You got to hear this. This is the most fitting name
זה השם ההולם ביותר שניתן במבצע צבאי, משום שזמן קצר אחרי חצות באמת הלמתם בהם עם פטיש. ידידיי, זאת רשימה חלקית, אבל זה די בכך כדי לומר שוב ושוב
Unusually there, Netanyahu speaking English in Knesset, which we understand requires special permission. Hebrew usually only spoken. And Michael, it's extraordinary to think about this country that wasn't a country 80 years ago, or at least not in a political sense. And yet they've built this democracy, this modern country, one of the most technologically advanced in the world, an economy that, until the war at least, was growing faster than other Western competitors.
Still is.
Extraordinary success story.
An enormous success story, and the technocratic skills, the startups, they actually not only punch well above their weight, but are literally world leaders in a number of different economic spheres. So the Israeli stock market, for example, is beating most countries around the world in terms of how it's been rising. The mechanisms that they have in place. And of course, it is a country actually which is founded on socialist principles, but the way they have, and so they do have issues with bureaucracy and things of that sort, my understanding is, but they have been able to develop a business-friendly society where startups can really do well and can actually progress very, very easily. And
right, Michael, we can go back to the speech.
All our hostages home. A proposal that ends the war by achieving all our objectives. A proposal that opens the door to an historic expansion of peace in our region and beyond our region. Mr. President, you are committed to this peace. I am committed to this peace, and together, Mr. President, we will achieve this peace. We've done it before. We've done it before in the Abraham Accords, and we'll do it again. Mr. President, today the Jewish calendar marks the end of 2 years of war. That war began on October 7th, on the Jewish festival of Simchat Torah. You always tell me, and you tell the world, remember October 7th. Mr. President, we remember. We remember the thousands of Hamas terrorists who stormed into our towns and kibbutzim. We remember the 1,200 people Hamas savagely slaughtered in cold blood, including dozens and dozens of Americans. We remember entire families burnt alive as they embraced each other. We remember the beautiful young Israelis brutally gunned down at the Nova Music Festival. We remember the hundreds of our citizens who were dragged into the dungeons of Gaza, including 12 Americans, men and women, young and old, babies and elderly Holocaust survivors. My friends, Mr. President, Donald, these monsters take babies as hostages. In response to this barbaric attack on October 7th, Israel did what it had to do. With indomitable courage, we set out to defend our people, to defeat our enemies, and to release our hostages. Our heroic soldiers fought like lions. They fought on the front lines of civilization and barbarism. Israel achieved amazing victories over Hamas and the entire Iran terror axis. Sinwar, Dev, Hania, Nasrallah, Assad, they're all gone. Iran's nuclear weapons and ballistic missile program, with your enormous help, Mr. President, rolled back. Half the Houthi leadership wiped out. But the price of this victory, the price of these victories, has been heavy. Nearly 2,000 of Israel's finest were lost, nearly half in battle. They left behind parents, spouses, siblings, and children. Their love and laughter, their promise and potential were lost forever. To the families of our fallen fighters, many of them are here, I say, I know the depth of your pain. I know the inconsolable grief that will accompany you for the rest of your lives. The State of Israel bows its head in eternal gratitude to our fallen heroes. Because of these heroes, our nation will survive. Because of these heroes, our nations will thrive. And because of these heroes, our nation will have peace. Mr. President, thousands of our brave soldiers were also wounded, suffering terrible blows to body and soul. Brave soldiers like Ari Spitz. Ari is an American. Ari is an American Israeli who was injured Ari is an American Israeli who was injured in Gaza while searching for Hamas terrorists and weapons. 2 of Ari's comrades were killed in this action and 10 were injured. Ari was presumed dead, but made a miraculous recovery despite losing 3 limbs. Ari, stand up for a minute alone. Stand up. There you go. There. Ari, you are the spirit of Joshua. You are the spirit of David. You are the spirit of the Maccabees. You are the spirit of Israel. I salute you. We all salute you. Sabine Tassa of Kibbutz Netiv HaAsara is watching us today from the Israeli consulate in Los Angeles. Sabine lost her husband and her oldest son on October 7th. She is the mother of 3 other boys. 2 of them, Kohen and Shai, witnessed their father jump on a Hamas grenade to save his 2 sons. We all saw the film of those 2 boys crying out in pain, "Father is dead. Why? Why did God save me?" Mr. President, my friend Donald, I've seen some very tough things in my life, but I couldn't bring myself to watch those boys suffering again. So I didn't see this film except once. Yet Sabine, their mother, has had the strength and fortitude to show this film across the world. And my wife Sarah and I asked her, "Sabine, how do you do it? Why do you do it?" And she answered, "I do it to show the entire world the monsters Israel is fighting and the justice of our cause." This is what she's doing once again in Los Angeles. Sabine, you can hear me now, so I want to tell you on behalf of all of us, you embody the spirit of our biblical heroines, Deborah, Ruth, and Esther. You too are the spirit of Israel, and we all salute you. Mr. President, you asked me on our many conversations during the 12-day war with Iran, you asked me, how are the people holding up? And I said to you, our people are strong. Israelis are a nation of lions with unlimited resolve to defend our country and secure our future. The people give strength to our soldiers, and the people give strength to me and to my colleagues. The Jewish people have risen from the ashes time and again, but when we formed the State of Israel and the Army of Israel, we pledged never again would be defenseless against our enemies. And that resolute strength not only assures our survival, it assures our future, it assures peace. We have paid a high price for this war, but our enemies now understand just how powerful and just how determined Israel is. They understand that attacking Israel on October 7th was a catastrophic mistake. They understand that Israel is strong and that Israel is here to stay. And this, Mr. President, is the indispensable foundation of peace. Peace through strength. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a momentous day, a day of great joy as the remaining hostages come home. My wife Sarah and I have met with the hostage families many times. There were no words to describe their agony, only tears of bottomless sorrow and unimaginable pain. At the beginning of the war, I promised to bring all the hostages home. Today, with the indispensable help, the determined and focused help, the unremitting help of President Trump and his team, and with the incredible sacrifice and courage of the soldiers of Israel, we are fulfilling that promise. It has been a long journey to get here. In the first week of the war, our brave soldiers put military pressure on Hamas, and the international community put diplomatic pressure on them. This enabled us to secure the release of over 100 hostages. In heroic rescue attempts behind enemy lines, Israel's special forces rescued 8 live hostages and brought back the remains of dozens more. But as time went on, we all know what happened. The diplomatic pressure was turned on its head. More and more governments bought into Hamas's false propaganda. More and more governments succumbed to anti-Semitic mobs in their own countries. They just turned on Israel. They called for us to surrender to Hamas demands, just leave Gaza immediately, they said, end the war without committing to disarm Hamas, without committing to demilitarize Gaza. Had Israel succumbed to those demands, not only would Sinwar, Nasrallah, Assad, and Iran's missile and nuclear program remain intact. Not only that, because in no time, the Hamas killers would be back on the border fence, ready to repeat the horrors of October 7th again and again, as they vowed to do. But just at that point of maximum pressure on Israel, a man named Donald J. Trump was elected President of the United States. And ladies and gentlemen, overnight, everything changed. Everything. Mr. President, thanks to your unequivocal backing of Israel, we secured a second hostage deal within weeks of your election. And in the months that followed, we worked closely together to forge a path to bring the remaining hostages home and end the war. End the war in a way that ensures the disarming of Hamas, the demilitarization of Gaza, and that Gaza would never again pose a threat to Israel. 2 months ago, you fully backed my decision to send the IDF into the last Hamas stronghold in Gaza City. You shared my view that this military pressure would help free the hostages. And despite all the criticism, all the naysayers, we were right. Hamas caved in. And 2 weeks ago, you succeeded in doing something miraculous. You succeeded in doing something that no one believed was possible. You brought most of the Arab world, you brought most of the world behind your proposal to free the hostages and end the war. I want to thank Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and Ron Dermer for their great contribution to this effort. And I want to thank our negotiating team. I believe that the close cooperation between the two of us, between our two nations, combining Israel's military pressure and President Trump's unmatched global leadership. I have to tell you, I've seen a lot of American presidents. I've seen them all in the time that I've been here, and I've been here quite a lot of time. I've never seen anyone move the world so quickly, so decisively, so resolutely as our friend President Donald J. Trump. With our military pressure and President Trump's global leadership, we achieved this historic moment. It's a moment of indescribable joy as our nation embraces our sons who are coming home. Mr. President, this week, Jews around the world are going to read the book of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, in the Bible. The Bible has many miraculous moments. One of them was your decision to bomb Fordo. I think it was a pivot of history because it wasn't meant only to bomb Fordo. That action and your previous action of taking out Qasem Soleimani, the architect of death, I think that changed the balance of power in the world. You brought America back again to the driver's seat. Now, I said that we're going to read this week the book of Ecclesiastes. It's not a book of action. It's a book of meditations, of thought, a perspective on life and on death. And in this book, we read the immortal words of King Solomon. To everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. Et milchama ve'et shalom. A time for peace and a time for war. The last 2 years have been a time of war. The coming years will hopefully be a time for peace. Peace inside Israel and peace outside Israel. I look forward to continuing marching with you on the path we paved together with the Abraham Accords. Under your leadership, we can forge new peace treaties with Arab countries in the region and Muslim countries beyond the region. Abraham's children will work together to build a better future, a future that will unite civilization against barbarism, light against darkness, and hope against despair. And my friends, I believe that with President Trump's leadership, this will happen a lot faster than people think. As Prime Minister of Israel, I extend my hand to hold those who seek peace with us. No one wants peace more than the people of Israel. Israel will always remain vigilant in defending itself, and Israel will always remain full of hope. Hope is our national anthem. Hope is our creed. Hope is our strength. It is time, my friends, to realize that hope and expand the circle of peace. Mr. President, thank you for all you have done for us. I have submitted your nomination to be the first non-Israeli recipient of the Israel Prize, Israel's highest award. As to that other prize, just a question of time, you'll get it. But I want you to get the Israel Prize, our highest award, to our greatest friend. When others were weak, you were strong. When others were fearful, you were bold. When others abandoned us, you stood by our side. On behalf of the government and people of Israel, I thank you for your extraordinary friendship. Thank you for helping bring our hostages home. Thank you for supporting Israel's march to victory. Thank you for paving a path to peace. מכובדי נשיא ארצות הברית, ידידי דונלד, ברוך הבא לישראל, ברוך הבא לירושלים, ברוך הבא ביום המרגש הזה, שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. May God bless you and your family, Mr. President. May God bless America. May God bless Israel. And may God bless the covenant between our two promised lands. Thank you, Mr. President.
So that's the end of Netanyahu's speech, a marathon speech, massive standing ovations. When Netanyahu, Miriam, last got a standing ovation like that from his own parliament, bearing in mind the political trouble he's been in, he's now warmly embracing Donald Trump, warming up for the main act. And he spoke about the extraordinary friendship between the two countries, America and Israel. Of course, Netanyahu and Trump have not always had an extraordinary friendship. There have been rumours of quite significant disagreements between the two men, perhaps not surprising given their very similar operating styles. But he also mentioned that in his speech that Trump's decision to bomb the Iranian nuclear facilities in Fordow were perhaps the most consequential action and support that the US had taken. And of course, once Iran was weakened, makes it much easier for Israel to weaken their other enemies, the proxy terrorist groups in the
Well, it was Mark White was using it. What's the phrase you used about how
this ring of fire.
The ring of fire around Israel has been virtually obliterated.
To a very large extent degraded or dismantled completely. We've seen, obviously, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon being effectively taken out by Israel. We've seen the Houthis in Yemen, the fight being taken to them. There are much fewer in the way of munitions that are being launched towards Israel. We should say that speaking at the moment is the leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, who I'm sure will embark on, again, a fairly lengthy...
But I suspect he will.
I think he will speak quite... this is his big moment to enter the world stage.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we were talking about the Houthis in Yemen, of course, Hamas in Gaza, who are launching munitions, rockets and other munitions towards Israel on an almost daily basis, have been dismantled and degraded to such a point they are completely null and void at the moment, certainly as a threat towards Israel. And then even the proxies in Syria and Iraq, there is very little in the way of activity from them towards Israel at that point as well. So I think we're just going to listen for a second to what the leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, is telling the Knesset.
But you saved so much more. You have saved
We're listening in now to the leader of the opposition in the Israeli parliament.
Whose loved ones now will be brought home for burial. You have saved thousands of soldiers who will now not fall in battle. And you have saved millions from the horrors of war. You have saved more than one life, and each life is an entire world. This is a historic moment, and a reminder that history is shaped by people. It is shaped by those who know the past, but have the vision to change the future. When you were elected, you declared that you would be the president of peace. You have kept your word. The fact that you were not awarded the Nobel Peace Prize is a grave mistake by the committee. But they will have no choice, Mr. President. They will have to award it to you next year. Peace will not come by waiting. It will come by building, by reaching out, and by daring once again to believe. You, Mr. President, have done the unimaginable. We will be eternally grateful. But we also need to take responsibility. The destiny of Israel will always be written by the people of Israel. We must now prove ourselves worthy of what has been achieved. From its founding, Israel has said to the world that our strength, our power, rest upon our values. Israel is the strongest country in the Middle East because we are the only democracy in the Middle East. Because we believe in the principles laid in our Declaration of Independence, which says Israel will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places for all religions. Those are our values. That is who we are as people, as a country.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It's just coming up to midday here on a historic day. We're listening into the Knesset in Israel, where Donald Trump is visiting and the leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, is speaking.
Here to stay. Our story did not end in the Bible. It began there. It continues in our laboratories and universities, in our innovation hubs. Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, and the Houthis.
Well, Well, in terms of the developments today, very, very significant developments in Israel and Gaza. Of course, this is the big political fanfare, and we know that Donald Trump has already received multiple standing ovations throughout his speech when he addresses the Knesset shortly after the opposition leader. Of course, there'll be more standing ovations. But against that backdrop is the hugely significant development today of the last remaining hostages who were still alive, having spent 738 days in the most appalling conditions, often in the tunnel systems in and around Gaza, now released, and all 20 of these hostages safely back in Israeli territory. As we speak, they're being assessed by medical authorities at the Sheba Hospital in Tel Aviv and being reunited with their family members, just so desperately happy now to have those hostages, former hostages, back home with them, safe and sound in Israel. It's a long road that they face ahead of them. Undoubtedly, there will be medical issues, but there will be many psychological issues that they have to try to overcome as well.
It was interesting as well to hear the leader of the opposition saying that Donald Trump should have been given the Nobel Peace Prize, which is, I mean, it's obviously too late, I think, obviously, because that's last year.
Well, it is too late.
It's interesting that he would
the sentiment of it, we can understand, given that the prize was just announced at the end of last week, but you've got to realise it's a backstepped process. So they were looking for applications for the Nobel Peace Prize from the previous year. So what Donald Trump has managed to achieve in a number of conflicts, and particularly this one, we don't know how this is going to play out, is probably just a bit too late in the day for this year's round as far as the Nobel Prize is concerned. Next year, I think many people will be expecting that certainly if this peace process holds, then how could you, even if you are the most ardent Trump hater, how can you deny the man a Nobel Peace Prize if he manages to secure a longer and more sustained process in Israel?
And this is so significant coming from the leader of the opposition here in the Knesset, because of course we know the electoral system in Israel is so fractured. You've got so many different people from so many different views, so many different coalitions always built within this parliament. None of them agree on very much. That's the history of Israel. You see that these coalitions are built tentatively and they can last for very short amounts of time. But for everyone in this parliament, from the left, from the right, from the government, from the opposition, to be singing from the same hymn book today, what a significant moment, Christopher Hope. What a significant moment for the US president too.
Absolutely. I'm looking back at the last time we had a US president address the Knesset. I think it was 2008, a long time ago. We haven't seen this moment happen. Of course, you couldn't have a more welcoming reception to him when he does finally speak. Of course, listening now to the leader of the opposition addressing the Knesset there. Earlier we heard from Benjamin Netanyahu saying that this country's been in a time of war for the past 2 years, but the coming years will hopefully be a time of peace. That starts this afternoon, of course, in Sharm el-Sheikh, when we understand that Benjamin Netanyahu is not going to go there, which is, we're trying to understand what that means, whether it's a safety issue.
We're told from the Israeli Prime Minister's office, Chris, that it's to do with the start of a Jewish holiday, and out of respect to the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel, he just feels he can't be there at this time.
There's some more background on that I've seen from a reporter at Axios, a very respected US news agency called Barak Ravid. Now, he says that Donald Trump was at the airport in Jerusalem, and it was conceived, this idea that Benjamin Netanyahu might go to Sharm el-Sheikh was actually conceived while Trump was at the airport. En route to Israel, Donald Trump didn't know that Netanyahu hadn't originally been invited to Sharm el-Sheikh. This is according to this reporting. And during the ride to the Knesset, what we're looking at now, during the ride in the Beast, Donald Trump's car, Trump told Netanyahu he should attend. And Netanyahu agreed, according to one source that Axios is reporting. And this sort of casual conversation in a car then got reported up as if Netanyahu's going, but it was just a word to Trump, and perhaps the security around all of that, the organisation just isn't there.
We were actually told that there was a telephone call that was brokered by Donald Trump to President al-Sisi of Egypt and Benjamin Netanyahu, at which it was agreed that Benjamin Netanyahu would be going at that point. So obviously the issue, the two, so the two hadn't spoken, apparently, since the start of the war.
But it shows, it's in microcosm an example of the informality of this peace arrangement, the way it's just kind of riffing here with family members of Donald Trump arranging meetings and that, but almost going outside the normal box, normal boundaries of diplomacy to make this happen.
Well, it does show that actually a lot of this is very last minute. A lot of this is, I mean, this summit, this time last week, wasn't even conceived of, and then suddenly we have leaders like Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, currently meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh. This address to the Knesset clearly delayed. I don't think anyone was expecting Benjamin Netanyahu to speak for quite as long as he did. According to the original timesheets, we were expecting Donald Trump to be in Egypt by now, and yet he still hasn't spoken in the Israeli parliament.
Long day. Looking back at those remarks by Benjamin Netanyahu to Donald Trump moments ago, he said on the Nobel Peace Prize, "You'll get it. I want you to know the Israel Prize, our highest, they want to get the Israel Prize, the highest award to a greatest friend," Netanyahu said. "When others were weak, you were strong. When others were fearful, you were bold. When others abandoned us, you stood by our side." So the emotional connection now between Donald Trump and Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu is really strong. And it wasn't, I don't think when he became president earlier this year, he was more about Ukraine, wasn't it? This has become the thing now of this second-term Trump administration.
Yeah. And it goes to show, and just in my view, having seen this, that Benjamin Netanyahu's tactic, the way he operated, protecting his people but continuing to show defiance and strength, looks to me right now to be the correct tactic. The West, many of us caved. The UK recognised Palestine as a state. I don't know, I'm not sure that was helpful, but Benjamin Netanyahu stayed strong. And I think that the United Kingdom could learn a lot from the way he operated and the strength of Israel itself in terms of the fact that it's so well armed, it's so well protected. Yet, if we look at that, had that been something that could have occurred in this country, we really would have been in trouble.
It is interesting to see that in Benjamin Netanyahu's speech, he name-checked a man called Steve Witkoff. Now, he is the special presidential envoy for peace and had been had a huge part to play in this 20-point peace plan, sort of conjured up by the Americans, agreed to by both Israel and Hamas. But there's an interesting domestic angle to Steve Witkoff, because in the early hours of this morning, Steve Witkoff sent out a tweet in which he said he'd like to acknowledge, this was completely out of the blue, "I would like to acknowledge the vital role of the United Kingdom in assisting and coordinating efforts that have led us to this historic day in Israel. In particular, I want to recognise the incredible input of National Security Advisor Jonathan Powell." Now,
is that the under pressure?
That could be. I mean, huge questions in terms of who tried to get this tweet out there. Why was this behind-the-scenes man named impromptu by Steve Witkoff?